Welcome to PSR, People Speaking Rail. We are those people. I'm Mike Baudendistel and joined by Joanna Marsh. Joanna, good to see you. So today we're going to be talking about the latest on the two-person cruise debate. Joanna, you just wrote up an article about that. We can also talk about Canadian National's comments on some of the new regulations in Canada, which they put out as part of their winter preparedness plan. We'll talk about what I thought was kind of a shocking derailment in Colorado from a coal train. Unfortunately, a truck driver, died. We have that article written up on that on the site. And then I can talk a little bit about what's happening in FreightWaves SONAR as sort of a preview of the company's reporting earnings. We do have JB Hunt reporting tonight, and then later this week, CSX and Union Pacific. I know, Joanna, you'll be following all of those very closely.
Yeah,
and
can't wait.
Lots of questions about the operating ratio.
It's interesting they say it in the calls. So it's interesting. Good bedtime reading. No, I'm kidding. Well, sort of.
Yeah, the first one or two is not so bad. After you've done 20 or 30 in a period of 2 or 3 weeks, you're ready for those to be over. Are you going to be at the conference? We have a conference coming up in about, I guess it's not about, exactly 3 weeks from today in Chattanooga.
Unfortunately, I am not going to be there, but it's still going to be a great conference. So, please check it out if you're, I think they will have some presentations online if you don't make it to Chattanooga. Are you going? I guess you'll probably be there.
Yeah, I'll be there. Love Chattanooga. Great place to visit in the fall. Good for running if you're into running or any outdoor activities. Lots of steep hills to climb up. But it will be a great conference. Like usual, there's our promo. We got that in there. So we have that at the Chattanooga Convention Center, and all sorts of shows to join. Tend to have certain events for shippers only, and explain all that's happening in the FreightWaves SONAR data product. We always release new SONAR data products. So that was a picture of the famous bridge that goes across the Tennessee River there. So I hope everyone can make it to that, which is coming up in 3 weeks. And there's a list of some of the talent that's there performing as well. So want to get into the first topic here a little bit. And you wrote up an article about Kansas joining the list of states mandating two-person crews. You can put that up there. So there's a picture of BNSF locomotive. Figured you'd have a Western U.S. rail for the art there, talking about Kansas. And so this state is going to mandate two-person crews. This joins California, Wisconsin, West Virginia, Arizona, Minnesota, state of Washington, Nevada, Colorado, and Ohio. So it's going to be 10 states that have a two-person cruise. Of course, the unions love it. Some quotes in there from the Smart TD union. And then you also had in there that in June, the AAR, of course, wants there to, be able to have fewer than 2 people in a cab when possible. Sued over the fact that this AAR says that the federal law should really preempt state law. What's the latest on that?
Sure. So, it's interesting because I think, this issue about whether to mandate train crew sizes, along with some other some issues that the unions are supporting. On one hand, there was, quite a bit of momentum after, particularly after the contract negotiations from last December. But it feels like it's slowed down actually a little bit in terms of that momentum, and maybe that's because of all the uncertainty that's coming, that's happening with Congress in terms of like, shutdowns and who the leader of the Speaker of the House will be, that kind of thing. So you have a lot of issues in limbo, including the question about whether to whether the federal agency, the FRA, the Federal Railroad Administration, should require two-person crews. I mean, I think they're looking at that right now, and of course, so you've had all these states come in and issue their own laws on it, and I think the one in Kansas goes into effect not quite yet. I think sometime in November. So. Yeah, so that is that the Association of American Railroads does have that argument about do um, kind of setting that stage up again about whether you know federal regulation should preempt these state laws, and I think that was actually their argument being that if you don't want to have this patchwork of regulation happening where some states have it. So it's like, especially since a lot of trade movements, particularly with the larger class one railroads, is across state lines, and so how does that work out? And I think something else on their side too. You kind of look at the recent incidents involving train derailments, and that's actually some of them have actually been have involved train crews with actually 3 or more people. I was just reading one today. The National Transportation Safety Board put out, sort of released to the public, its examination of a BNSF train derailment that happened in the northern states earlier this year. I think it was a chemical spill, and I think of that one there were actually like four crew members involved with that one. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that their argument has been that safety and sort of train crew size don't necessarily have a neat correlation, and of course the unions will say otherwise. Sometimes pointing to sort of qualitative anecdotes, like the things that do happen that you see, that it's beneficial to have one other person there, but you don't report it because of course nothing happens. So usually some sort of someone in front of the tracks. So yeah, so that's kind of where things are at right now. It's just one of those long-standing issues, and so I guess we'll see what happens with that. I guess it'll probably take some time before, I don't know, see some sort of resolution one way or the other.
Yeah, if I had to guess, I would say that two-person crews are going to be with us for a long time. I mean, it does seem like a lot would have to change in order for one-person train crews on long-haul trains to be acceptable. I mean, there's no federal law currently that mandates two-person crews, but the union rules do. So I guess in theory, right now it's something that unions could negotiate away. I don't think they will, but in theory they could. But all of these states making their own laws makes that very difficult. And that's to say nothing of the FRA, which may mandate two-person crews, which makes all of those 10 state laws essentially irrelevant. So I think one way or another, two-person crews will be with us for some time. I think we'll probably see robo-taxis and autonomous driving, vehicles, trucks, before we see even one-person crew on a train, let alone a zero-person crew. So that's where I think we are. I want to move on to the next topic here, which this was pretty interesting. The Canadian National, and I almost didn't spend too much time reading this because Canadian National publishes a winter preparedness report every year this time. I mean, winter comes every year. That's pretty foreseeable, but they seem to use this as an opportunity this time to make their case that some of the regulations that have come down the pipe in Canada, at least from the railroad's perspective, have been an overreach. And so, this report, sort of on the surface, they talk about just how many locomotives they have in place, the crews they have in place, why they're going to have decent service. But you highlight that some of these new regulations, like this bill C-47, which reintroduced the extended switching in the prairie provinces. So I guess that would be in Western Canada, starting on September 20th, so about a month old, and that basically enables a longer area where there could be interswitching, which is what Canadians would call the reciprocal switching in the U.S. And so currently, or at least before that rule, it was 30 kilometers, so 18 miles, and that's being extended from 30 kilometers to 160 kilometers. That's 100 miles, and so potentially that could give rise to more interswitching opportunities that the shippers would be able to require. And then CN sort of, kind of says that this is one way that things could be worse from a service perspective is that regulation. And then they list another couple of other regulations here. They say that there's a new duty and rest period that went into effect earlier this year that cut the number of max hours from 18 to 12. That seems like maybe a good law to me. Seems like you'd be pretty fatigued after the 16th or 17th hour on the job. I know I would be. The next thing they highlight is the replacement worker legislation. So the government in Canada is going to introduce legislation by the end of 2023 banning the use of temporary replacement workers. And so at least my understanding is, like when I used to cover Canadian National, the investor relations people would tell me that one of the ways that they deal with strikes is that they have non-union employees that do basically office work that are trained to fill in when they can. But it sounds like that would be impossible under new regulation. So it's almost like Canadian National, at some point the winter causes service disruptions. We don't know whether it's going to be a avalanche or a polar vortex in Chicago or what exactly it's going to be. But it's almost like they were making excuses in advance and blaming the government in advance for potential disruptions to rail service that have not taken place yet. Is that how you felt about it?
Well, I kind of felt kind of similar. I had kind of similar impressions in the sense that winter happens every every year, and especially in Canada, and and it gets cold, mighty cold out there, eh? And that kind of thing. And but what struck me about this report was just sort of like, well, we have all these regulations, and who knows what will happen, what will really happen if once we factor in all these regulations. And so, I guess, I suppose in their situation, you're trying to sort of portray a worst case scenario or potential worst case scenarios that could happen, when the reality is, well, you probably hope for everyone would be something less severe. I mean, even for CN, you wouldn't necessarily want a meltdown to happen, and then even if it theoretically is. Even if the regulations do play some factor, I think they would still get a good share of the blame. So so yeah, but the idea that this is sort of the uncertainty about how the regulations will affect winter operations, sort of underpinning like the whole report, was kind of an interesting view that they took, that they might not necessarily have had as much in past winter reports. So
yeah, they also mentioned some positive things in there too that could potentially help them, like not just the resources in place, but partnering with Norfolk Southern to operate intermodal through Detroit and Chicago, extending the network reach, with the partnership of some of these other railroads, which seems like was something that was a competitive response to the Canadian Pacific acquiring Kansas City Southern. And then of course, they talk about some of the things they have to do when the temperatures get to be extremely cold. Like they talked about the number of 25 negative days where the temperature tends to be below negative 25. And in some parts of Western Canada, it's between 25 and 35 days. So you really have to run the train slower, run the train shorter in order to get the air through the air brakes. But want to move on to the next topic here. This was kind of a shocking one, at least to me. Derailments happen all the time, but this one just kind of, that one piece of art that we have on that I think you found from Twitter shows this. So this is an NTSB is investigating deadly BNSF coal train derailment in Colorado. Unfortunately, truck driver died on the scene, and it was on I-25 in Colorado. We have a picture that shows, kind of exactly, not exactly what happened, but kind of the aftermath there. And that's the thing that really, that I thought was shocking. So this is a coal train, and railroad cars, when they're fully loaded, can be as heavy as 286,000 pounds, what they call gross vehicle weight. So that would be the weight of the rail car, in addition to the weight of the payload. And so, it's not going to be clear until there's an investigation exactly what happened, whether that was a derailment that caused that bridge to buckle, or maybe it was just there was too much weight and the train was stopped. I can only kind of speculate, but you can see all the coal there, that's been dumped. Those coal cars are open on the top. They're open top hoppers, primarily is what's moved coal, or gondolas. Those are also open on the top. So let's see the big spill of coal. That's a photograph from Colorado State Patrol, about the incident. But is there any more detail on this one?
There's some headlines that I saw, and confess I haven't really, I didn't look at the articles thoroughly to see, but like there is some question about who who is responsible for the maintenance of that road. I think state officials are saying that it's BNSF that should be maintaining the bridge, and BNSF is saying that it's actually the state's. It's something that the state should be handling. Those are the headlines I saw, so I'm not sure what the latest update on that is. And then, of course, there are some other headlines that I saw where, Colorado is suggest, sort of rail safety legislation in light of this incident.
Mm-hmm.
I had wanted to post in the story and I was unable to do it. There are actually some other tweets by the Colorado State Patrol of the incident, and there's actually one video. It's actually it's kind of you see it's kind of a shocking video. I mean, you kind of you see the coal cars just kind of scattered all over the place, and you see the coal all out of the cars, and so it is kind of it's like, oh my gosh, that's a big mess. and of course, I feel badly about that truck driver who just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. If he's just only, you can always say if only, but if only he was just like a minute earlier, a little minute later, I don't know. But that question about who maintains that bridge, that'll probably be something that'll be looked at over the next several weeks.
Yeah, we'll have to wait for the investigation to see exactly what happened. I'll go and check out that the video. I was not aware of that. It was our last topic here. I just want to run through a few sort of SONAR charts. So we'll get more detail from companies as they report. But sort of going into that third quarter, bring up this total carloads chart, which is from the AAR data. If we can get that total carloads chart on the screen, and this is one of the reasons why a lot of the analysts are a little cautious going into the third quarter earnings reports. You see in 2023 is that white line, and the quarters get compared primarily versus the year ago period, and you see that in green. So pretty significant drop in overall volume when you're looking at the carload side of the business. And a big part of that is a lot of the industrial commodities, so things that are sensitive to higher interest rates. We've seen a big drop in like lumber, car loadings, and there are some pockets of strength with things like motor vehicles, which still are pretty strong, despite the strike in Detroit. But sort of all things considered, those volumes a little weaker than I think most people anticipated going into the quarter. I think one of the big events in the quarter that I know you wrote up for the site was Union Pacific talking down their numbers at a Wall Street conference. And that was partially because of the disappointing volume and also higher costs. The railroads have faced a lot of cost inflation as a result of higher wages and equipment rents and those things. The next chart I want to show is heading on the domestic intermodal side of the business. So this is the O-Rail DUML for anyone that has a SONAR. And those volumes have ticked up. You can see in the white line is 2023, and they had been sort of lackluster kind of all year. Most of the carriers had talked about how those volumes have been not improving as much as they had been, seasonally, and that was even true for most of the third quarter. But starting in about late September, really started to see some degree of normal seasonality in the domestic intermodal volume. And so, when I sort of look at that, I see volume is up about 5% when you consider sort of month over month. When you look at the sort of the first part of October versus the first part of September, in the third quarter, overall volume was still down 1.2% quarter over quarter, but you still look in October, it's up year over year about 2.5%. So I think that's one thing that we'll hear from J.B. Hunt this afternoon when they report, is that the volume trends have improved somewhat. This is really sort of J.B. Hunt's primary market in its intermodal segment, in addition to Hub Group and Schneider, those companies that compete. And then the domestic intermodal side would still think there's plenty of excess capacity in domestic intermodal. Recall earlier this year, J.B. Hunt was saying on this analyst calls there's about 15 to 20% excess capacity, and still think there's some degree of excess, even if it's not quite at that range. I want to turn to the next one, which is intermodal rates, and these are specifically intermodal spot rates, if we can get that up on the screen. And so what we have in SONAR is we have a breakdown of intermodal spot rates on 100 lanes. And this is an average of those 100 lanes. And what happens sometimes is that the rates rise as we get later into the year, like it did there in 2020 and 2021. 2022, it took off of there, but really that would be a downward slope. Last year, there really wasn't much tightness towards the end of the year. Have seen that white line, which is 2023, increase slightly. So you look at the total average of those 100 lanes, went from $1.66 to $1.73. Not really a big deal for most of the lanes. Last year at this time it was about $2.25, so still lower than it was a year ago. And really that suggests to me that the carriers are not concerned about having capacity protected for the big contractual shippers. So they are willing to entertain spot activity for the most part. One of the lanes that's bringing up that average is the Chicago to Dallas lane, which in the latest data point went from $1.78 to $2.15 from the first week of October to the second week of October. And so that's one area where, if you're going north-south, shippers might see a little bit of tightness, but not seeing a lot of evidence in the tightness in those sort of dominant sort of long haul east-west lanes in intermodal. The next SONAR chart I want to bring up is maybe the one, if I could only show one, it would probably be this one, is the intermodal contract rates, which we're getting from a company that processes payments, transactions, interactions between shippers, intermediaries, and carriers. And so this is an average of what I would call purely domestic intermodal transactions. And by purely domestic, I mean not just in the 53-foot containers, but also in a lot of lanes that are not anchored by a port city, that are more competitive with the highway. There's a lot of intermodal in here. There's a lot of CPG in here. And that white line is the 2023 number. And you've seen that fall throughout the year. And this latest data point is down about 17% year over year. And that does not include the volatility in fuel. So fuel surcharges are excluded from that down 17% number. And some of the companies that we interact with on the shipper side, companies that move either retailers or moving consumer packaged goods, some of them have put out their bids recently, and some of them are saying, well, when we're dealing with the asset-based intermodal companies, specifically the ones that own lots of containers, some of the bids are coming back even more beneficial to the shippers than down 17%, down sort of 20 to 30%. And it's really because the intermodal companies are taking delivery of lots of containers. They want to keep those containers turning, and are willing to cut rates to do it. So that's a little bit of what we're seeing in Sonar. So a little bit of a mixed, picture, and would say that there's still plenty of capacity available in the freight market. Quickly, just want to highlight one of our upcoming shows, which is it next week or is it a week from now? We're talking with Dan Walsh, CEO of Track Intermodal, kind of as a follow-on to one of the articles that you wrote. You did a Q&A with him. I'll have to think of some other good questions, for him.
Yeah. So yeah, just kind of looking at Track Intermodal, they specialize in chassis and sort of chassis, the question about chassis availability and stuff like that. I think that might be 2 weeks from now, or will run 2 weeks from now. So be sure to check that out when it comes out.
That's right. I just brought it up my calendar. It's October 30th. We'll have an interview that'll air with Dan Walsh, CEO of Track Intermodal. Next week, we'll probably just run through whatever happens in the world of freight railroad in the next few days. But with that, hope everyone has a good one.